Hey, well, thank you so much for doing this. I'm glad we finally found a time, and it's been so great just talking to you so far.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I know, this is great. So, what have you been realizing, learning, contemplating, like thinking about in the last week or month? I like to start in the present.
Oh, just like in
Yeah, what's like been
general?
on your mind? What's something maybe you heard on a podcast or have been talking about? What's been like something that's really present for you?
Podcasting. I
Me
think about
too.
it a lot. Yeah. It's kind of what I think about like 80% of the time, actually.
Me too. Probably like probably not as much as you, but a lot of people are thinking about it more now.
Yeah. Well, it's a really amazing and insane time for it. So
Yeah.
it's fun.
Talk about that more. So what are you talking about this weekend at South by Southwest on this panel? Is it about that and the growth of podcasting?
The panel this weekend is going to be, I should know a little more because it's like in 2 days, but it's basically about sort of like longer form media in kind of like a tweet driven landscape. I think is the name is something like that. So they want me to talk about I think what's interesting about podcasting in that context is like to like listen to a podcast takes such a deeper level of engagement than so many forms of media right now. So like you read a tweet, takes like,
Yeah.
maybe 2 seconds, and then you listen to a podcast, takes maybe an hour. Something I think is interesting about it is I feel like people are excited about podcasting partially because it's a medium that is really hard to troll. And
Yeah.
and there's so much like trolling going on right now in the
Yeah.
world. And I remember like when I was at BuzzFeed, we started this show called Another Round, and it's a great show. I love it. It's hosted by 2 amazing Black
I think
women.
that's how I found you.
Oh,
Just
cool.
hearing it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hosted by
So
Heaven
good.
Nagatu and Tracy Clayton, who are like just like very cool and wonderful, and it's an amazing show. But they talked a lot about how like, on Twitter they're like 2 like young Black women, and they have a lot to say, and they're very anti-racist obviously, and they people really like come after them in like these disgusting ways on Twitter. And then when they started the podcast, it was just like this amazing outpouring of love, because it's like if you're somebody who wants to troll someone, you're not going to spend an hour listening to their podcast.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the people who spend an hour listening to a podcast are usually the people that really like want to engage with that person and really love them. So I think it's like kind of a just sweet and friendly place to be in that way.
Yeah, it's so funny. I've never even really thought about it in that way. I knew that like intuitively, but I've never heard it articulated, where I've had almost no negativity on the podcast because my shows are usually, and I know you don't have time today, but like almost 2 hours long. And if someone stays to the end, I always say an emoji at the end for them to tweet at me if they've been listening, because I'm always shocked when people are, but they do. And I've never gotten, every once in a while someone will say something about what the guest said that they maybe don't agree with, which is great, but you have to be pretty invested to spend that much time engaging with something.
Yeah, and even like I'm very open to criticism of like the shows that I work on if I can tell that somebody has really listened. I think like most trolling comes from people who haven't even really paid attention to what you're saying. So I love getting podcast criticism, actually. I always find it really weird when like filmmakers are like, I don't read reviews, because I like read the shit out of reviews. I read like everything people are saying on iTunes and everything people are writing about, and it shapes a lot of what we do. I mean, like we did this show Missing Richard Simmons that became quite controversial. It was basically us looking for fitness guru Richard Simmons, and who sort of disappeared. I mean, spoiler alert, we found him. He's in his house. But it ended up being like this crazy thing that, kind of blew up, and lots of people listened to it. It was like on the cover of People magazine, which we absolutely had no idea would happen. We just were like, well, let's make a weird thing about this like weird guy. But it was actually really helpful to read criticism of it throughout, and we changed episodes based on what we read. So we started off really like as these like goofy underdogs, like looking for this guy, and then by the end so many people were listening, and it was this like kind of cultural moment for the podcast, and we were like, oh, we're no longer the underdogs, and we can't really like act that way anymore. So then we actually like we killed our entire final episode in large part based on like what people were saying about the show. Like, you know, people were complaining that we were like stalking this person, and so we redid the episode around that. So I actually think criticism is really important to read, and there's a lot that there's been some stuff that I've just like disagreed with so much, and I don't think that we did anything unethical with that show, but then, you know, there was like a New Yorker piece that was like kind of critical and also like, this is very entertaining, and I really loved reading her criticism and like learned a lot from that. That's Sarah Larson at the New Yorker, who writes really well about podcasts.
Yeah, I think when people are really good at writing criticism, it can be art itself, and I think, and obviously you can learn from it, and it's really cool to see that, or to hear that you are malleable and listen, and I think that makes the best work when people take feedback well.
Yeah, I've always liked reading cultural criticism, and it's weird when you're on the side that's being culturally criticized.
Yeah.
But it makes you sort of, I remember at first I was like, well, you know, like we considered all of this stuff that you're saying, and like, you know, and like, do you know, I wanted to just be like, do you know how hard it was to make this thing?
Yeah.
Like, we thought about all of this stuff and we like decided to do something else. But I value cultural criticism.
Yeah. Okay, I want to go back to before podcasts existed and the beginning and your beginning. So this is really just a love letter to you. So you, I think like me, grew up in a college town.
I did, Northampton, Massachusetts.
Okay. So what were you like as a kid? What was growing up there like? What did you want to be when you grew up back then?
I did always really like radio. I don't have a very interesting story because it's like my parents listened to public radio all the time. I was in like a liberal college town. I'm sort of exactly the person who's like going to end up in public radio, which is where I was for a long time before I switched over to like podcasting only. I was a pretty crazy kid. I got kicked out of 3 preschools.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
what did you do?
One, I hit a kid with like a tape recorder. The kid's
a tape
fine.
recorder.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, I was already doing. Yeah. Another one, I wanted to walk around naked while I ate lunch, and I wanted all the other kids to do it. So I was trying to get everyone to like rebel and take off all their clothes and eat their lunch naked. And finally, they were like, "We can't have her here."
Oh my God.
It's hard to put a bunch of kids' clothes back on them every day.
I want to see a movie of that.
Yeah. And a
That
third,
sounds hilarious.
I got kicked out of a Waldorf school for gender nonconformity, which is really, I don't recommend those schools.
Yeah.
It was like, they were very into like girls do this and boys do this, and I was like really into trying to do everything boys were doing. And they were like, they called my parents and they were like Jenna she's not like doing the things that she's supposed to be doing. Ew. Like gender wise. And my parents were like, fuck you.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, so
good.
And then I found a school that was great. And my dad always says like the only time he was really embarrassed of me was when we went to the orientation for that school. It was like 2 hours long, and I stayed in character as a dog the entire time. It's like I was like licking people. It was like I was like an insane child, I think. But it's funny, like when I was like 12, I got very into Ani DeFranco, and I did this thing where I like took I was like audio editing early on. I took like every time she said fuck and I put it into a compilation. I like recorded onto tape from my CDs just when she said fuck, and there were like 20 of them in a row, and my dad was like really proud of it.
That's impressive at 12. That's impressive now.
That's a weird thing to do, but it was like my dad like told all his friends. He's like, Jenna's amazing. I have unbelievably supportive parents. Like it's a little ridiculous, but he was like, she's so amazing. She made this like compilation of like Ani DeFranco saying fuck, and all his friends were like, what the hell are you talking about? That sounds weird.
Did he play it for them?
Yeah, he did. And he was like really excited about it. But I think like when I look back on it, that was like I was like audio editing, and I was excited. Like I was like, oh, this is so cool. And it was like this sort of like, it was like mechanically interesting, and just I was having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then I like I like volunteered for our public radio and station, and then I started when I was like 14. I started listening to college radio, to the Smith College radio station, and I would like call in. I had all these friends who were like in college who were like really excited that like some like nerdy 14-year-old is calling in being like, play Slater Kinney. But I got really into that, and then I started like volunteering there, and then I was a teenager and becoming friends with all these like cool Smith College girls who had awesome radio shows. Then when I went to college, I ran the radio station at Oberlin. So so I guess radio was always in my life, but it was weird because I did have these really supportive parents who were like, you could do anything, but they didn't have much money, and I really wanted to make money, and I didn't see this as something that was going to do that for me. Like public radio is not a place people look for like making money. So when I got out of college, I got a job at a law firm, at a corporate law firm as like a financial collector, which I don't talk about that much now. And I actually loved it. It was me like calling like huge banks to be like, you owe us $4 million, and like when are we gonna get your money? And I was like 22 and didn't know what the hell I was doing.
It's probably a good skill to have.
It was a great skill to have. And then you would watch the money come in, and it was such a thrill for me to be like. Like sometimes they didn't like get who I was, and they'd put like my name on the check with like comma the law firm. And I was like, oh my God, this is like
I just made $4 million.
Yeah, totally. But then I was like, oh, this is cool. But then, I thought about going to law school, and I'm really glad I didn't. I feel like that's something people do when they don't know what they want to do.
Yeah.
Like I know so many people. I have multiple friends now who were lawyers, and then they quit law to do podcasting. So our intern right now was just like a incredibly well-paid corporate lawyer.
Wow.
And she came here and makes $12 an hour and is so much happier.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
One of my best friends, she now is she just wrote a book and is a writer and does a bunch of things and was also an attorney. I feel like a lot of people have that, like, what do I do? I'll just do this.
Totally. I'm so glad I didn't do that. But I had started a job at StoryCorps, or an internship at StoryCorps when I was still working at the law firm. So I'd go to StoryCorps in the mornings, and then the law firm let me like work in the afternoons, basically. So I would do like 4 hours at StoryCorps, 6 hours at the law firm. And then 3 months into that, StoryCorps, which was a new company, hired me, and I was there for almost 5 years. So that was really how the radio and audio stuff turned into a real job.
Yeah. So I've heard you speak before about so you had this internship at StoryCorps that you were talking about that was meaningful in your work. And I think I've heard you talk about the intern system and specifically why having a diverse staff starts with paying interns fairly and how that's good for both creating quality content and also growing your audience and even the bottom line. Can you talk about that and when and how you became aware of that? Was it in your own intern experience?
It was. I mean, I just think it's obscene that people, I see what interns do. They're not just there to like learn and, they're there to work and you got to pay them. And I don't think I'm not saying that people have to pay interns like crazy amounts of money, but there are so many places that don't pay interns at all, or they pay them like a transportation stipend of like $20 a week or something. And that's always really bothered me. And actually at Pineapple, my company, Pineapple Street Media, it's been fun to like kind of take our values from that we like learned in past jobs about like what we do and don't want
Yeah.
and apply them here.
Like
So
create an ideal space.
yeah. So my business partner Max and I, we actually paid our interns before we paid ourselves here, and that was important to me. And we're doing something now for the first time. We're actually looking for people to apply. We've gotten a ton of applicants.
I was going to ask you about this.
Yeah, we're starting a fellowship for like underrepresented voices in podcasting, because the landscape really has changed a ton over the past couple years in really exciting ways, but it still is definitely like the majority of hosts of shows are like middle-aged white men, and we just want to help with getting different voices in there. So it's an internship for underrepresented voices in podcasting. It's actually it's a fellowship, pays $3,000 a month, and it's really like a teaching experience and a learning experience, and people should kind of think of it as like something to do maybe instead of grad school, where you get paid instead of having to pay. So we're really psyched about that, and like people seem really excited about it. We're just getting like tons of interest, and
That's so cool.
Yeah, but people should go to our website if you want to apply.
Is it something that you think you'll continue to do every year?
I hope so. I mean, maybe even twice a year. I mean, I think like, if you want to, I mean, people are in our industry are always kind of like, we need more people of color, making shows and producing, and it's like they're out there, but you gotta like give them
Help
jobs.
them. Yeah.
And and we really, I think, like so many people in this industry are from like pretty high income backgrounds too, and that's another thing that we hope a fellowship can help with, is like we basically are paying like a living wage to like learn something new that you don't know anything about. So I'm excited about that.
I think I read on there that you obviously would prefer someone with some audio experience, but that's not required. And I thought that was really profound, because someone might want to get into this but doesn't have the resources or hasn't had the ability to get themselves that knowledge that they would learn at doing this. And I thought that was really cool of you guys. Yeah,
mostly we're just looking for people who can like work hard and learn quickly, hopefully. And and I think it's a goal for us to, we'd love to be able to hire a person afterwards, not guaranteed, but we actually just hired a ton of people and need to stop for a little while, but we want to like really help this person get like a job in audio for sure. So I mean, it's an experiment like most things we do here, and I'm excited to see what happens.
So what were your early years interning like? What did you really learn from your internship? And
I got lucky because I really only interned for like 2 months before I got offered a job.
Cool.
At StoryCorps. So, I mean, I learned a lot, and I think I realized like you gotta hustle really hard and show them that, like, let them see the work you've done. And I mean, we've hired almost all of our interns now, and I think it's like a real, I guess like the thing we tell our interns here is like, make yourself invaluable. Like make it so that we can't run this place without you. And they've almost all done that. And I think like that's kind of my advice to interns too, is like, don't ask tons of questions all day long. Just like do the things that you see need to be done, and that maybe other people didn't even see needed to be done because they're too busy with other stuff, and just show people like how much they need you.
Yeah, that's such valuable advice. So, and I think also too, you spoke about this before. I've heard you speak about this before, but when we were talking about internships and how you were really hustling, like you're a really hard worker, and you've always been and had this work ethic of doing your internship and working hard, and then also supporting yourself, making money. And so I think these opportunities you're providing are allowing people to be able to be a better intern by giving them a wage that they can live on.
I hope so, yeah.
Yeah. I'm basically just reiterating what you said.
No, but true. Yeah, I mean, well, I could talk a little bit about hard work stuff.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
I mean, I think podcasting is a very, very, very exciting place to be right now because it's just like really blown up. And, you know, I have like Gimlet, I think, to thank for a lot of that. Like Serial was a huge deal in our community because I think people were like, oh, you can like do something that's like a massive hit that's a podcast that, you know, it costs money, but it doesn't cost nearly what like a TV show would cost. So people got really excited. And then it's just like this thing that people are talking about. So now we have all these documentary filmmakers coming to us being like, can't really get people to care about our documentary films. So like maybe we can try them as podcasts. And that sounds really interesting. But it's a really great industry to be in. And I meet with like young people all the time who are trying to get into this industry. I'll talk to anyone. Just email me. It's jenna@pineapple.fm. And I think like a lot of them get kind of discouraged because it's not like an easy place to be when you're a beginner. But I guess what I did was I would have jobs usually in some kind of audio, but I would also be doing like 5 other podcasts on the side. So I just remember I learned audio production skills and I put something on Facebook that was like, hey, I know how to do this thing. Like, does anyone need help making their podcast? And like multiple people from like companies and like magazines, just like my friends, were like, yeah, can you help us? And so then like I started a podcast with The Believer magazine called The Organist. And my friend actually at Facebook had, who like worked at Facebook, asked me to make a Facebook podcast. So I think like it's just really important to like let people know that you can do this thing and then just like fucking hustle so hard. Like I just wanted to get my name on as many things as possible and be able to be like, you know, have like a name that people recognize if they listened to podcasts. It took a long time, but it took like many hours of hustling after work. So
what were those early years like? So you were doing a bunch of things. You went to school at Oberlin and then decided to move to New York. How did you know you wanted to be here? And what were your first, few years living in New York like?
Yeah, I don't even know if I wanted to be here. I was in a relationship with someone who was here, so I came here. And now I can't imagine being anywhere else. I mean, it's the best place ever. And it's really it is really the center of podcasting. And I feel so lucky to be here because if I'd gone anywhere else, like, nothing in podcasting good would have happened to me. So, I mean, yeah, it's always hard when you're trying to figure out what the hell you want to do. And I was just like, had this like sad law firm job and, bumming around. But then when I started at StoryCorps, I was like, oh, you can do work that like pays you some money and also is interesting. And I got to travel like all around the country with StoryCorps recording. StoryCorps, for people who don't know, is it's like a national oral history project, and family members and friends like come into a recording booth and talk to each other about their lives, and clips of them are played on NPR nationally, and then they all are archived at the Library of Congress. So I got to travel around the country and just like meet amazing people. And I think when I got out of, actually, here's a goofy story. When I was in college, I had a friend who was studying cinema studies and creative writing, and I studied politics, and I was like, oh, I'm going to go to law school. And I remember talking to her and being like, I think like you're making a big mistake by studying these things. Like, it's just not logical. Like, what, you're going to be like a filmmaker? Like, what are you talking about? And that's Lena Dunham.
Oh my gosh.
So that was, I think, like seeing some of what she did, I was like, oh, like it actually might be a good thing to like follow some of your dreams.
Yeah.
But it took me a really long time to get there. I think I was like, it took me many, many years to be like, oh, like I should take risks and like try crazy things, and like being happy at work is like a thing that you can have. And I'm like so happy now. It's just like, I love coming to work every day. I love everyone who works here. And yeah, I would get like mad at people who would say, follow your dreams. I'd be like, well, like that's easy if you're like a rich kid, but I think if you really like are hardworking and you have a passion, it's good to try to do that.
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, I heard once on a podcast, somebody said something like, follow your dreams, but also the dreams that are following you. And I think that's kind
interesting.
Of like, if something's super far out and you don't have any momentum in that direction, like maybe that's not for you.
That's
but
really right. Yeah.
If over here is kind of working, like maybe go for it.
Yeah, follow your dreams, but be realistic about them. But that's interesting because when we started this company, like the dreams the dreams that were following me, like I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. I never wanted to have my own company, but it got to a point where it just would have been completely stupid to not start a company because it was like those dreams had like followed me and crept up on me and were like, dude, do this thing.
Yeah.
So like when we started Pineapple Street, I was at BuzzFeed at the time running their audio department. After StoryCorps, I worked at Simon & Schuster for a bit doing audiobooks. Then I went to The Moth and produced their radio show. And then I did a bunch of like side stuff in between at like NPR and The New Yorker. And then I started a podcast department at BuzzFeed. And that's where we made Another Round. We made Women of the Hour with my old friend Lena Dunham that we then took to my new company.
Will that be coming back?
We'll see. Okay. I don't know. We're talking about it, but it's just like something that like Lena and I do when we're not crazy busy, and we're both pretty crazy busy.
Makes sense. Yeah. But fingers crossed because it's so good.
Well, thanks. It's a fun show. I mean, she's a controversial character, but I think we've tried to make a really nice, like well-produced series with her about women's lives.
You definitely did.
Thank you. But yeah, so I was at BuzzFeed and was having a baby and was like, I know it's crazy, but like I should also start a company because my friend Max had come to me. I had been editing his podcast, the Longform podcast, and he came to me and he was like, look, tell me why we shouldn't start a company together. And I was like, only because I'm scared. That was the only reason I had. And because I like just hadn't really thought about that. But then he sort of like said it in like a like flippant kind of way, and then he put it in my head, and I was like, we're absolutely doing this. And like Cool. He was like, oh no, I don't know about that. And I was like, yeah, we're doing it. So he had been talking to people at the New York Times before they had started an audio department. They were basically like, if you could do any show here, what would you do? And he had been like, well, we'd be like Wesley Morris and Jenna Wortham, and we'd want them to like do a culture show, which became Still Processing, which was one of our first shows. And he'd also been talking to Wyden Kennedy about doing some like branded content for them. They're a big ad firm. Then I had been talking to Lena. She wanted to do another season of the show we started at BuzzFeed, but she didn't want to do it at BuzzFeed. So she was like, can we do it somewhere else? And then we had this, and so then we had like, all these, we had the New York Times, Lena Dunham, and Wyden Kennedy. And then I was like, why not? We're like, we have to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we were like, let's do things that people like, let's ask for things that are so crazy that people will say no to them, and like make it a goal to have someone say like, no, we're not doing that. So we decided to email Hillary Clinton's team and just be like, we really like Hillary Clinton. We want her to win. And would she ever want to do like a podcast that's just like her talking about what's going on? And they said yes. We were like, oh no, like what? We didn't think they were going to say yes. It's crazy. Like now we have to do this thing.
So cool.
And that show was our first, like the first few lines that ever came out from our company, Pineapple Street, was my co-founder Max just like talking to Hillary Clinton and being like, what should I call you? Hillary or like secretary? Like that was like the first thing we ever released. So we had like, the New York Times, Lena Dunham, Hillary Clinton, and Wyden Kennedy. And we were like, okay, we're absolutely doing this. So we started the company a month before my son was born,
wow.
Which was pretty insane.
Okay, so you're at BuzzFeed. You have this job it sounds like a really dream job. Like you're the director of audio. You're producing shows that you like. You're working with friends and really cool people. But then you have this other thing a-brewing and really going to be something great. Things are going well in that direction. But making that transition, especially you're about to have a baby, like that sounds like a lot. How did you mentally handle the the stress of taking that leap, because I know I'm doing it. A lot of people listening, like those transitions of going from a full-time job situation to freelancing mentally are so challenging. What advice would you give to yourself back then, or someone doing that? How did you manage that?
Well, my advice is not just going to be like, just follow your heart. Because I actually, this is where I don't believe you should follow. Like, what my advice is, if you really want to do something risky like this, have a bunch of money committed to you before you do that. Like, I was still at BuzzFeed and we had these 4 amazing clients like committed to us basically. And that's when I left. So we basically knew where the next year of money was coming from. And that is what made me do it. So like when people leave their jobs with like nothing lined up and no money, I just like really worry about them. I think you have to think really, really hard about it and start to like really see how realistic it is before you do it. And then, get to a point where you realize that like not doing it would be stupid, which is where we were.
Yeah. Let's get into Pineapple a little bit. So I love the name. I love the office that we're in. How did you and Max come up with the name?
We had a bunch of names we were throwing around, and Pineapple Street is a beautiful street in Brooklyn Heights. And it was sort of like, it was a few things. It was an aspirational title where we're like, if we do really well, we might live on Pineapple Street someday. Also, it's really nice to have an emoji associated with your company. Like I don't think I've written out the word pineapple like in a very, very long time. I just like send that emoji all the time. And pineapple, it's a nice looking thing. It's like
tastes good.
It tastes good. It's like an international like welcome symbol. It just like it looks good.
It's a very beautiful fruit.
It's a beautiful fruit.
Yeah.
Like I think people should name their companies after beautiful fruits.
Yeah.
We're like about to start like this isn't announced yet, but we're
exclusive.
I mean, I can't go into too many details, but I can say that we're going to start like a side company.
Oh, cool.
And we're trying to think of other fruits for it. But like pineapple's definitely cool.
I mean, there's a lot of cool emoji fruits, but the name, the actual word is a really good word, pineapple. Kiwi's pretty good.
Kiwi?
Yeah. I kind
That's
of like
good.
that word.
Yeah.
The emoji's not as pretty for sure. I think the emoji kiwi's kind of weak, to be honest.
Oh yeah, it's like it's like
cut.
Cut kiwi.
Which you have to do because the kiwi without
weird.
being cut is pretty
like
ugly.
A brown ball.
Yeah. Okay, I saw that you tweeted this great article that I read the other day, and you quoted this part that says, the most engaging radio and podcast hosts are those who are authentic and confine in the listener as if they're friends. So you are around a lot of podcast hosts. In all of your experience, what do you think makes a great podcast host after editing thousands of hours and being around them?
Someone who's charming and appealing and you want to come along for the ride with them. I think in like a chat show type thing, I've never really heard one work if the host wasn't at least a little bit funny. I think like a good sense of humor is really, really important. Yeah. That's why people loved Another Round. Like it's on hiatus right now, but when it was around, it would just like, I would just like be hysterically laughing. I would be crying, laughing, recording that show. Like every week they get just really, really drunk and they're like the funniest people in the world. So I think like, people want to laugh. And I think the most important thing is a genuine curiosity from the host. So like, I can tell that you're actually like wanting to talk to me right now. And that's really good. And I've definitely been on podcasts where like, I can tell that like someone told a person that maybe they should talk to me about something and like they didn't look me up and like don't really know much about me. You can really tell, and then the audience can really tell, because when you're genuinely curious in another person, they can, they open up in a different way. And it's weird. Like I've talked to a lot of people who are like, who come in and they want to talk about like a podcast they want to launch, and they're like, oh, well, we hear that like small business podcasts are doing well, like about like, running a small business and whatever. And I'm like, is that what you're interested in? And they're like, oh no, like I'm interested in like, you know, celebrity gossip, but like, you know, this is the kind of podcast doing well. And I'm just like, you cannot do, like, that's not the podcast for you to host. Yeah, I think it's really about like what excites people. There's this podcast I love called Who Weekly. That's like,
so good.
Yeah. It's like, Lindsay Weber and Bobby Finger talking about like celebrity who's, which are people who kind of make you say like, wait, who's that? Like people that aren't like super famous, and they like do these amazing deep dives on these people that like there's no reason for you to care about them at all, but like the like deep dives they do and like make it really hilarious, and it's just it's like really fun to listen to.
It's them that makes it so fun, not the content.
Yes, exactly. And that's the same with, there's this show that's so popular now called My Favorite Murder, which is like these two women talking about murderers. But they do it in this like really kind of funny way. They don't always have the facts right. But like the murder part of it is kind of interesting. But the thing that really like makes it fun is like that they're like two comedians talking about this thing that they, that they're just like excited about.
Yeah, I feel like I'm constantly saying that like with the people I interview, I have to be, or that I talk to, I have to actually like and want to have a conversation with.
Totally true.
Because as soon as I started doing this for a while, and then people wanted to talk about their book or come on the podcast, and I just thought that was cool that people were asking, and so I was saying yes, and then it was a terrible conversation, not because of them, but just because I was like not really as into it as I was with all the other ones that I reached out to.
Yeah, totally. So I mean, and even like Fresh Air, which is like the best interview show of all time, basically, Terry Gross. She gets a million pitches. Everyone wants to be on that show. And she is only doing the things that she's genuinely interested in. And you can really tell. Yeah. She's like, she does her research. I mean, and I imagine that there are tons of people who are pitched to her who then, you know, who she starts to research and isn't very interested in and says no to. So, you gotta be excited about what you're talking about.
Yeah. She's my hero. I was listening to her. I was kind of nervous on the way over, on the walk over here. So I was listening to, and I just listened to interviews with her. Like, there's not that many, and so I listen to them like on repeat whenever I like need a moment, because she's like the coziest person to me.
Yeah, and she's so great.
Yeah. Have you met her?
I met her. We've like been at a lot of the same things. Yeah. She and my co-founder Max have become friends.
Oh,
like
cool.
He had her on his show, the Longform podcast.
Yeah, so good.
It's a great interview.
So good.
And now like they hang out when he goes to Philly.
Oh, that's so cool.
It's really great. I mean,
so cool.
She's just really cool. And I know that she's a fan of Pineapple's work. She's told people that, and that's like the biggest thrill of my fucking life.
Yeah, like, someone who grew up on public radio.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Oh my God, she's really the master.
Yeah, I'm not going to get the number right, but this interview I was listening to on the walk over here, they said how many interviews she's done, and it was something like 150,000. It's probably way more than that, or I don't know. But it was, I remember hearing the number being like very impressed of when you asked me 200, like compared to Terry Gross's.
She's definitely done thousands.
It's so cool. Okay, so on the other side of being a host, there's the producer. So what makes a good producer? I think I heard you mention once that a good producer wants to produce and a good host wants to host. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people get into podcasting because they want to host shows. And when we're hiring, we always are looking for people who want to produce shows. So, and there's a big difference in those two things. Like, I never ever want to hear my voice on a microphone. I'm sure this will be like a lovely talk, but I can't listen to it. Like, I don't ever want to do that. So, I think we look for people when we're looking for producers who are like really committed to building a story, but who don't need to tell that story themselves. I mean, as a producer, you sort of are the one telling the story in a lot of ways too. Like, not in your own words, but like we've had shows where our producers write the entire scripts and a host is just reading. We've only done that once, and I won't talk about which show that was. But it's like, it's not ideal. You want your host to like write their own scripts. But yeah, producers do so much of that work. And I think, I don't know, there's something about being a good producer that's it's like you're looking for a type of person who doesn't mind being in the background of things, and not looking for somebody who like needs to be the star, basically.
Yeah.
So it is a really different skill set for sure. And also, not everyone should have podcasts, like this is actually something we tell people a lot, which maybe we shouldn't, because it means like less business for us. But
yeah.
a lot of what we do is like we'll go into like big magazines, and they'll be like, we want to do like 10 podcasts just because like our writers here want to host podcasts about like where they just like talk about whatever. And we're like, don't do that. Like, not everyone who's a good writer is a good podcast host.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, many people who are good writers are not good podcast hosts.
It's a really different skill set.
It's such a different skill set, and people don't really get that. And we always tell people like, do a podcast if you like really feel like you like desperately need and want to host a podcast, but not just to like build your brand or build your audience. Like, you have to have something to say, and you have to be compelling to listen to.
Yeah. Are there any other qualities for a producer of a podcast, or any advice you would give to someone who's maybe wanting to start a podcast independently, like something small like what I'm doing, that people should know?
Yeah, well, so that second question that's a big one. Like, people, it can be really discouraging when you first start a podcast. I'm sure you know that. Like, you're like, oh, 10 people listened to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to stick with it. Like, I think people think that like right out the gate they're gonna have like 50,000 listeners or something.
Yeah.
It takes years and years and years to gather listeners, and it also takes like improvement. I mean, if you listen to almost any podcast, you listen to their early episodes, they're just not nearly as good as their recent episodes.
Yeah.
And so you build an audience as you get better and better too. So yeah, I think like if people out there want to host podcasts, just know that it takes a long time to build your audience, and don't get discouraged, and host a podcast if you really think you have something to say, or if you really like want to talk to people who you think an audience would be really interested in, basically.
Yeah. I meant to ask you about interviewing and curating guests and speaking to guests. What kind of things could you share there?
Yeah. Well, I don't do the interviews myself, so
Yeah.
I'm not.
But you're around people doing
I am
it all
around
the
a lot
time.
and I write a lot of prep docs for interviews.
Yeah.
What we always tell people is, don't just read from a list of questions. Like, you're doing a good job here because you're doing like follow-ups. That's what a good interview is all about. It's about listening to someone's answer and then following up with a question that relates to that. And then you go back to your list, obviously, and are like, okay, we've finished this subject. I'm going on to another one. But yeah, I've definitely been interviewed by people who like are reading from a question list. And like, Max, my co-founder, was just telling me the other day about an interview he had where someone was like, where he listened back to it, and the person was like talking about like a lot of my work I think is affected by like my father who died, and wow, I've never even thought about that until this moment. And then Max is like jumps in and is like, so where'd you go to grad school? And he says it was like his worst interview moment because yeah, I mean, he had like a great opportunity. Someone was really opening up and he just cut him off. And you hear that in like bad interviews all the time. You're like, that's what's so great about Terry Gross is like, she's always asking the next question that you want her to ask.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, like there's something like left unsaid. And then she asks the thing that will answer that left unsaid question. Because
I think she's listening. So she's so present.
Totally.
And she's so listening. She talks about how she closes her eyes a lot during interviews because she's specifically not in person with people.
Which is another really interesting thing. Like, I think everyone imagines that she's like just sitting across the table from someone like we are now.
Yeah.
But even if someone is in Philadelphia where she's based, she does not want to be in person with them. Because that's her style, and I totally respect that.
Yeah. I grew up going to Catholic school, and there's confession where you can like do it face to face or without, and it's kind of like that. Like, I think people are more real when they're not having to look in
Yeah,
the
that's
eye with
interesting.
someone, or you can. And when I was living in Michigan, I started this podcast doing them all remotely. And then I think there is something, I think the experience is more memorable. Like, I think we'll remember today, maybe in 6 months, of like, oh yeah, I came and you were wearing a cool striped shirt and we saw each other on the
Yeah.
street. But we maybe wouldn't have remembered this interaction as much on Skype. But I talk about this in the workshop, that there's pros and cons of doing it both ways.
Yeah.
And it can work for a podcast in both ways.
So is your workshop an interview workshop?
I talk about interviewing, and I talk about like having an independent podcast throughout. There's like 8 modules, and I've been interviewing people like you and lots of different people about.
You should interview yourself for this, because I think a lot of people's question is like, how will I make any money off of this?
Yeah.
And you've brought in your own sponsors, and
Yeah.
you know, it's not like you're gonna be a multimillionaire all of a sudden, but like I think like that's a question a lot of people ask me, and it's like, you have a podcast and you can just start like emailing interesting brands and charging them like really low rates for you know, to advertise on the show, and then maybe put 2 or 3 ads in a show, and then you're okay.
That's exactly what I've done. And it's funny because one of my friends has a comedy podcast that he gets, you know, it's not his full-time thing. He has a TV show too, but he makes a lot of money for his podcast because it's huge. And I was like, well, maybe I could reach out to some of those same people. They would just pay me less. And that's what I realized. Like, brands, I think this is, and I'm sure I want to hear what you think about this. I think brands it's kind of the Wild West of podcasting for a lot of brands. And so they're almost throwing money at podcasts because they want to be associated with doing podcasts, and they'll just
That's
pay
not going to last, but
yeah.
take advantage of it.
But they're paying like they'll work with as many as they want. They'll just pay them less money if they're smaller.
Totally. Yeah.
So I'm totally taking advantage of that.
Yeah, it's the only industry right now where people are actively like trying to advertise on it.
Yeah.
You know? Like, usually you have to like really chase people down. But, you know, which doesn't mean that like people are like necessarily like throwing.
Yeah, maybe
money
that
at
wasn't
all
the
the time,
right
you know?
word. That was a little bit much.
No, but like, yeah, but it's, you know, if you had like a blog and told someone that you wanted them to advertise, I don't think it would be nearly as appealing as, you know, I mean, you also have to know how to frame it. Like, I have a friend who's doing a show for like women in their 30s and 40s, which is like a great group of people to spend money. I mean, it's a group of people who love to spend money. It's sort of like upper income, like 30s and 40s women. So she drops that to these places that she wants to advertise. She's like, it's like kind of upper income women in their 30s and 40s, and they're like, okay, how much money do you want?
Yeah.
So I think you also you have to know how to frame your show in a way that like is going to be appealing for advertising.
Totally. And I think also, if it's something that I genuinely really love, and the sponsor knows that, like, for instance, there's this company that should be getting paid to talk about it right now, but it's the shower cap company, and I like never wash my hair, and so I was using those shitty hotel shower caps and saving them for.
What's the company called?
Shower cap with like a bunch of H's and a bunch of E's.
Okay.
It's very cool. And it's this really quality shower cap that looks pretty cool and like doesn't let your hair get wet. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's similar to like, you want to interview people you're actually interested in. People can tell. There are some shows, I won't call them out, but where you can just tell that they're not
a fit.
All interested. Yeah. And you're like, why are you? And I'm also like, why is the advertiser, like, what do they think they're going to get out of this when somebody's like reading a Casper mattress ad and obviously just trying to like fly through it? And that's actually a thing we do with all of our hosts of our shows, is we ask them like, are there brands that you want to be aligned with? Because those are definitely those are the first places to go. Like with Lena, you know, we did like a big thing with Clinique, which is a company that she likes, and we had a big deal with a big like advertising deal with MailChimp, and that's actually where she started her Lenny letter. So those having like a good fit makes sense. And she sleeps on a Casper mattress, which was crazy. So then Casper wanted to sponsor it. So and she actually really likes her Casper mattress. So I think that's I mean, you can't always get the advertisers that you really want the most, but it's a really good place to start. And like everyone we talk to, I mean, we're working on a new show with Hillary Clinton, and and we were like, what are the what are like 5 brands that you'd want to sponsor this? And she gave us 5 like amazing brands that have really great reputations, and those are the places we'll start.
It's like you get to know the host, so if you'll know what they actually like, and you can tell, which is the great part about podcasting, but it's easy to be disingenuous with that stuff, where
Totally.
if you don't know the host as well, it wouldn't work out.
Yeah.
So with the speed of and the growth of podcasting in the past 5 years specifically, I'd love to know about where you see the future. And I think I've heard you talk about the intersection of podcasting and Hollywood, and where do you see it growing? Maybe where do you see it in the next 10 years?
Yeah, so I think a really fun thing that's happening right now is that people are seeing the like intellectual property potential in podcasts. So like Gimlet has a bunch of shows that are being turned into movies and TV. Like they just had Julia Roberts sign on to 2 seasons of their show. They had this fiction show called Homecoming. It's now being turned into an Amazon TV series with Julia Roberts as the star, and like Dylan McDermott and Alex Karpovsky and all these like really cool people. Yeah. They also have had their like first show, Startup, is now optioned into like an ABC comedy with Zach Braff. Yeah. So people are really seeing the potential, the like intellectual property potential. So a lot of the things we're working on, we basically get paid a set amount to make products that are going to be primarily owned by other places. So we'll have like a Hollywood studio or like a big production company hire us to make like Missing Richard Simmons, which they then own and can develop it into whatever they want afterwards. And we've made it for them, but we're not cut into the deal. Now we are more and more. So now we're basically like doing projects where we'll create really interesting intellectual property, but we'll maybe own like 25% of it. And we're now going to go into business with like basically, I can't talk too much about it, but like my favorite, like basically like my favorite filmmaker. Cool. We're going to like go into a business with them, and
that's so cool.
Yeah, we're going to make these like big, beautiful series that like they then, maybe like 1 out of 5 they'll try to turn into a movie.
Oh my God.
Basically.
I'm so excited.
It's going to be really amazing. I'm so excited.
That's
I was
so
like,
cool.
It's like a total dream. But yeah, so I think the funding models are changing a bit, because like we're not we do kind of like production for hire type things. We're like we can make a really beautiful product. You pay us a bunch of money up front, and then you can figure out the ad stuff and how to make money off of it, and we'll just figure out like how to make it awesome, basically. Yeah. So people are, I think, paying more money to like know that they're going to own this like really exciting intellectual property that they can then turn into other things.
Yeah. Okay, a couple quick questions. We'll do these quickly. I want to know, we talked a bit about interviewing, podcasting, and producing. What about documentary style podcasting and storytelling? What should people keep in the back of their mind when making something like that? What would be your greatest advice?
And that's actually kind of like what we're moving into, doing that almost exclusively. Like we're pretty much going to like drop all of our like chat shows and interview shows and just move into like kind of serial S-Town style things. Cool. A thing to know is take your time. That shit takes a long time to make like an S-Town. Takes, that took them, I think, almost 4 years. Serial took like 3 years, and huge teams of people. Yeah. You have to really like commit resources, and it's not easy to make those things. And that's the thing with producers too. Like, I used to think that like the best thing we could get, like the best producer is like somebody who has like great technical skills, but it's really somebody who can like tell a beautiful story. So just if you're going to do like a big sweeping series, know that it takes a lot of time and a lot of resources, a lot of people, and you have to have a story that is like really, really, really worth telling. I mean, everyone loves crime stories right now. We're trying to not do like just like murder stories, even though we know they do really well. But if you have a great murder story, that's probably going to do well.
Do you still listen to podcasts and audio content when you're like in your free time, or are you listening to music?
I listen almost exclusively to NPR News. and I use the NPR One app to do that, which like curates the best news of the day.
Yeah.
Not the best.
And
but
it's probably cozy to you because you grew up with it.
Yes, totally.
Yeah, there's something about whatever you listen to growing up, I think.
And I just love news. Like that's always my thing. I love news and politics.
Do you listen to The Daily?
I have listened to The Daily, and I think it's really great. I think like nothing can really pull me away from my NPR habit.
Yeah. I listen to both. They're both good.
Yeah.
Okay. You somewhat recently became a parent and started your company at the same time, which we talked about already. What has parenting taught you about yourself and just in general? Greatest lesson, maybe?
Parenting makes you a lot more patient because you're dealing with like a maniac all day and you have to be chill about it. He's almost 2 now. I mean, I didn't even, to tell you the truth, I never really like wanted to be a parent that much, but I married someone who did. And I'm like really like glad I did it. But I also think that it's not for everybody, just like podcasting.
Yeah.
I think it's like, it's great to not have kids and it's great to have kids.
Yeah, well said.
It changes your life a lot.
That was really well said. Okay, we always talk about social media and technology a little bit. So how do you balance your relationship with social media, the internet in general?
Like addiction to media?
Yeah, addiction to your phone. How do you balance that?
I'm not great at it. But I'm also like I'm not. Yeah, I don't care that much about social media. Like I'm terrible at Twitter. Like I just usually like retweet something that interests me, and most of my Instagram is mostly like my kid doing goofy things,
which is great.
It's fun. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just honestly like I think I'm so busy. I don't have that much time to be like. I don't have nearly the time I used to have to like just fuck around on Twitter.
Do you leave your phone on the weekends or like when you're not at work? Do you do like time off your phone? How do you handle?
I should. It's like something I've been talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I should try doing that more.
Doing so much and being a parent and an entrepreneur and all of these things. How do you handle stress? Do you meditate? Do you go to therapy? Like what are we doing mentally to make everything happen and be such a well-adjusted human?
I don't know how well-adjusted I am. I eat too much. That makes me feel better. But I've recently started going to a personal trainer. My business partner and I decided that we should that's such an important thing for our mental health that we were gonna like pay for it from the business, which is legal in your taxes. So I'm not doing anything bad. So we both started seeing a trainer, and we have great. Just trying to be healthy.
That's amazing.
I walk a lot. I get a lot of ideas walking.
It's the best part of New York, I think.
Oh yeah, totally.
My favorite part of living. I wanted to ask you that too. What's your favorite and least favorite part of living in New York?
New York to me is like I'm like married to New York. Like it's like to me it's like almost perfect. Like yesterday I turned to my wife and I was like, why hasn't the city figured out like how to plow fucking snow? Like we have snow all the time. It's not big news. Like why is it like all over the news and everyone's talking about it and like it's messy and like no one's plowed. And I was like, oh my God, like I've never said anything negative about New York. That was like the first thing. So I'd say the thing that bothers me is that they don't always plow snow quickly enough. And almost everything else is perfect. Actually, I was just thinking about this because I was thinking about just like how exciting and wonderful the city is, but also that it's like but I also have like a beautiful, quiet apartment. Like it's not just this like craziness all the time. It's like craziness and then you go home and you're cozy, and that's really nice. And like on Friday night, my friend Liz went to see a 90-year-old tap dancer who once a year now does a show, and you have to email her Earthlink account.
Oh my God.
And you have to be one of the first 50 people a year to email her Earthlink account, and that's how you get in. Yeah. Where else would that happen? You go to her like Soho loft and she tap dances. That happened Friday night. Saturday night, I went to see Bruce Springsteen on Broadway, which was incredible. And fucking Barack Obama was there.
No way.
In the box seat right above me. At the end, he just started waving and everyone lost their minds.
Oh my God.
And then Oh, and then like my coworker was telling me on Sunday she went to see this like gospel choir at Joe's Pub, which is like this really great like tiny venue in Manhattan, and like for their
I live
last
right by there.
yeah, oh cool, yeah. And for their last song they pulled Carly Simon on stage and she sang with them. Like where else
cool.
does this happen?
Yeah.
And just like the people you meet every day are amazing and inspiring. Like I have so many like brilliant, wonderful friends here, and like it just is actually a place where like you can dream big. And I don't think it's for everyone. I think it's for really ambitious people. And like if you're ambitious, there's so much opportunity for you here. And if you're not, it's not the place to be.
Yes. Oh, you said so many things that I'm so glad that you said.
I know it's also it can be a hard place to live. It's not particularly beautiful. It's like loud and like, you know, crazy and chaotic, but it's like, to me, it's just like a dream.
Me too. It's so magical. Did you always want to live here as a kid?
Not at all.
Really?
Yeah, my whole family's from here. So we were here all the time. And I was like, I thought it was just like disgusting and weird. Did you?
Yes, always.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, because you were probably really far from it.
Yeah. I never really came here. And I think if I hadn't moved here, I always would have wondered what it would have been like to live here. So I had to just do it.
My family's all from these like tiny little like tenements in Queens too. And so it was like a really like just sad and poor place when I visited it. And I didn't really know like, yeah, but we'd have fun. My mom is like, she's such a scammer. I love her, but she would always sneak us into the second half of Broadway shows. So I saw like the second half of tons of shows for free. We would just so like cool. Sit down and people would be like, oh, those aren't your seats, but like, let us help you find this. And she'd be like, I forget where we were sitting. And then they would just like find us like available seats. And we did it all the time. And so that was fun for me. But New York also, when I was a kid, was like Times Square was like just like porn shops basically.
Really?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that all changed in the 90s. But like when I was a little kid in like the late 80s and early 90s, I just remember being like, this place is disgusting.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, I know you have to go, so many things that I wanted to ask you. I'm going to ask you the final question, but quickly. Somebody told me, because I always ask about New York, and I think you'll like this. Somebody said that New York is like a circuit, and you can at any time plug into anything you want to plug into, or you can also be alone in your apartment.
So true.
I loved that.
I love that.
Anyway, okay, so this podcast is called Let It Out. I know that I wanted to ask you more things to have you let out, so we'll have to do this again another time. But is there anything else that you wish that I would have asked or you wanted to mention today that you want? Did I wring you dry for all of your
this
wisdom?
was really fun. You're really good at this.
Thank
Keep
you
doing
so
it.
much. Thank you. That means so much for me. Thank you so much.
It's like very conversational.
Oh, good. Well, I had a blast, and I could keep talking to you, so this is great.
Thanks for coming here.
Thank you so much, and thanks for letting us record here.
Yeah.